You're asking me to talk about when she died? Oh, God. I'll need a moment.
I remember being bent over the toilet, vomiting, and my mom would be so worried. She was like, "This is the worst flu I've ever seen." And I kept reassuring her, "You don't need to worry," because I knew that the only thing that needed to be done was I needed to take my insulin. But I couldn't let her know that. And so I just said, "Well, you know, Mom, diabetics, they don't have the greatest immune system." The mind is like water. When it's turbulent, it's difficult to see. When it's calm, everything becomes clear. Swimming was always something that I loved as a kid. Even though I hated being in a swimsuit, I loved being in the water. I could just dive into the water and it was quiet. I was 9 years old when I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder in which your body's pancreas stops being able to produce a hormone called insulin.
The first few years, it was heart-wrenching. Try to imagine being a 9-year-old and being told, you have a chronic illness that you will have for the rest of your life. There is no cure. You can manage it, but the management of it is a 24/7 job. With type 1 diabetes, every single thing you do is a calculation. What you eat for breakfast. If you have PE, are you having PE before lunch or after lunch? And how does that affect what insulin you have to give yourself at lunch?
Type 1 diabetes really stole my childhood from me in a way that I was no longer about chasing through sprinklers or running after the ice cream man. It was about calculating the grams of carbohydrates in those ice cream sandwiches, or how much exercise that running through the sprinklers was going to detract from my insulin ratios in a day.
With Erin, because she was overweight when she was diagnosed, in addition to blood sugar numbers and total counts of carbohydrates and dosages of insulin, she also had this other number of weight. And her doctor hounded her and hounded her and hounded her about that number on the scale.
It became harder and harder and harder to keep my head above water.
There's a thing called diabetes burnout, where you just get tired of being a diabetic. And you're bound to experience burnout and have periods where you just don't take as good care of your diabetes.
August 16th. I feel that familiar nausea rising in my stomach, swirling like a snake slithering inside me. I know what it means. My sugar is well over 700 now. My body, alarmed by the amount of sugar coursing through my veins, is trying to warn me. With every passing second, my blood slowly fills with sugar, and without insulin to combat it, it starts to pull my body down. My kidneys start to struggle to function at 100%. The nerves in my feet die a little more, and like a drag of a cigarette, my life expectancy slowly starts to slip out of my hand. The truth is, I don't want to die. But there's always one thing I want more than that, more than anything else. and that is to be thin. I was done being diabetic. I was done being somebody's number. I was just done with it all. I was gonna take a break. And so I stopped taking my insulin. I decided it was more important for me to lose weight than anything else. And I ended up losing everything in pursuit of it. So at the age of 14, I developed an eating disorder known as diabulimia. So often at times, it feels like diabulimia is like trying to keep your head above water when you're learning how to swim. They keep throwing more and more things at you. Mental math, do your arms, now carbohydrate counting, don't forget a kick. Oh yeah, and exercise, breathe, breathe, breathe. But at the end of the day, I was sinking to the bottom.
When I first started to notice signs that maybe something was wrong with Erin, started with the number of days she was missing school. Both she and her doctor were able to convince me that because of her immune system and the diabetes, that's what was making her very vulnerable to everything that was in the germ factory of the school.
And at the beginning, it was bouts of nausea that would last for weeks on end. And then there would be little infections. And it seemed like my body just couldn't get healthy.
And then there were, I guess, more diabetes-specific signs. How often we were needing to reorder insulin for her. She eventually got wise and just started having me order it even though she wasn't using it.
To trick her into thinking that I would have better blood sugar readings, I would test my blood sugar and wait till it had a quote-unquote perfect blood sugar, and then I would put it in the top of a lid. And whenever I needed to use that blood again, I would rehydrate it, retest that blood, knowing it was already a perfect blood sugar, and then retest it, and it would always come up between 80 and 120 every time.
Some things were starting to not make sense.
And I would do 30 tests all at once and then bring her out the meter, and it would just all be from the last 10 minutes.
She was also starting to have frequent DKA, which is diabetic ketoacidosis episodes. And those are episodes where you have to go to the hospital, be put on IVs. Sometimes you end up in ICU. And that happens to an average diabetic a few times in their lifetime. And for Erin, it was starting to happen every few months.
It was a dramatic amount of weight that I lost, and the problem with diabulimia is that you can see some really dramatic weight loss because you're losing things like water weight and muscle tissue and things that really matter to your body's health. But you can't tell that when you step on a scale. All you know is that you're 5 pounds down than you were the week before. You're more likely to develop staph infection, muscle atrophy, kidney infections, urinary tract infections, liver disease, coma, death. One of the hardest complications for me to deal with was the chance that I could no longer have children. And for many other women like me, this is a very real and very alarming complication that's on the rise. November 9th, 2001. Every day I get sicker and sicker and my body becomes more frail. Isn't this what I wanted though? My pants fall down as I walk, and secretly, I leap for joy. If I could leap at all. Regardless of what it had done to my body physically, and it had racked a serious toll. When I got back to school that fall, all my friends were so complimentary. And I took it and I ran with it.
Initially, I thought it was an eating disorder. We took her to the psychologist.
And I told him absolutely everything I was doing. I was completely honest. And he looked at me and he said, "Are you starving yourself?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Are you forcing yourself to throw up?" And I said, "No." And he sat me down with my parents and he said,
She did not have an eating disorder. She was just a rebellious teenager.
I spent the next several years taking my body to its limits.
And so we spent the next 2 years trying every parenting technique in the book. We went to workshops, we read, we went online. None of it worked because, of course, we weren't actually addressing the problem.
March 20th. The feeling of disgust is drowning me whole. I'm swept away by this tidal wave of self-hatred and anger.
They do teach you as a parent to try to teach your child as a whole person and not just as a diabetic. If they're grouchy, if they're in a bad mood, don't immediately ask, "What's your blood sugar?" Implying all of their moods are controlled by their blood sugar, because they are. They're whole people and they're allowed to be depressed and happy and angry and everything else just like the rest of us.
So after I graduated from high school, I said I was going to stop my eating disorder. I had at that point missed my prom because I was in the hospital, and it was then that I realized, okay, I don't have the control over this that I thought I had.
When she went away to college, we thought, fresh start, this will be great, everything will be fine.
But it followed me to college, and it followed me to the dorm rooms, and it followed me to the late nights, and I ended up relapsing.
Erin broke her leg, shattered it, actually.
And I fell just walking to my bathroom.
Got her to the hospital. They did surgery, 14 screws, 2 plates.
The doctor told my mom everything had gone, okay. But I knew something was wrong immediately. I could feel my leg, which they told me I wasn't supposed to be able to do. In the preceding hour, they would give me the necessary dosage of morphine for someone my height and weight.
What would have been a perfectly fine dose of morphine for anyone else sent Erin into respiratory failure.
I flatlined.
And she turned blue and stopped breathing. It was probably the scariest moment of my life.
They called out a code blue.
All the nurses come rushing in. One crawls up on top of her and they're getting the paddles ready. And it's one of those times where it was less than a minute and it felt like 10 hours. I didn't know if she was coming back or not. It was the scariest minute of my entire life.
Just under a minute later, I would come back. I would remember a man sitting on my chest giving me CPR, trying to apply the paddles. And right before he could, I would take my breath of life so that they wouldn't have to. When I came back and I realized what had happened, the very first thing I thought was, they're gonna make me start taking insulin again. It wasn't until I saw my mom's face that I was able to say, something has to change, and something has to change now. People often say that recovery doesn't come in a straight line.
Recovery does not look like this.
My recovery relapse dance has gone up and down and all over the place.
You get a lot better, and then you fall, and then you get back up, and you swirl around for a little bit, and then you get a little better, and then you fall, and that's what's hard.
My mom and I found an eating disorder recovery center, and I was there for 3 months where I did a lot of work with a really amazing therapist. And so when I came out, I knew I needed to find more people like me. And that's kind of how my plight into advocacy work and with Diabulimia Helpline really all got started.
She woke up one morning and needed help and went out and looked for it. After she'd found 200 people who were all saying the same story and had the same struggles, she kind of just stood up and said, well, nobody else is doing this, so I guess I will.
Diabulimia Helpline it was just a tool to help me recover myself. I was alone. I started an online Facebook support group. And then from the Facebook group, we started the website. From there, we went on to do a 24-hour hotline that can be reached 365 days a year.
I'm amazingly proud that it has been her just consistently and constantly putting her heart out there. The way she's gone about it, I am so proud. Just so immensely proud.
And the thing that keeps me coming back time and time again is the people, the connections I've made, the lives that we've saved, the kids that have been born because Diabulimia Helpline exists now. These are all of the amazing things that I know wouldn't exist if I had just given up when my eating disorder told me to. One of my favorite quotes is, she leaves a little sparkle everywhere she goes. And I realized I wasn't leaving anything. I wasn't leaving joy or light or life or love anywhere I went. And now I get to fully embrace my life, and there is nothing more important to me than being healthy and loving the skin that I'm in. There's nothing better than being me, and that's good enough.